In a small-town animal shelter, everyone steps back when the man in the wheelchair rolls down the hallway. His scarred hands and military posture tell a story no one dares ask about. But when he stops at the kennel, holding the shelter's most aggressive dog, the staff grows concerned. They've all seen what this German Shepherd can do. "Sir, please stay back," a volunteer warns. Without acknowledging her, the man lowers himself to eye level with the snarling animal. What happens next leaves the entire shelter in stunned silence. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of unexpected connections and second chances touch your heart, subscribe to join our community. We share new stories of courage and redemption every week. The weekend crowds at Lakeview Animal Shelter created a familiar chaos that Thalia Winfield had learned to navigate with practiced efficiency. Families cooed at puppies, children pressed eager faces against kennel glass, and volunteers guided potential adopters through the maze of barking dogs and meowing cats. At 36, Thalia had served as shelter director for 5 years, long enough to recognize which visitors were serious about adoption and which were just killing time on a Saturday afternoon. She paused at the administrative desk, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear while reviewing the day's schedule. 3 adoptions confirmed, 1 foster pickup, and a last-minute veterinary check for the new arrivals from the county seizure. Her eyes lingered on the final item, the follow-up assessment for Kennel 17. The deadline was approaching. "Thalia?" Dr. Farron Emery appeared at her side, clipboard in hand. The shelter veterinarian's usually calm demeanor seemed strained. "We need to discuss 17. They both glanced toward the isolation wing at the far end of the building, separated from the main adoption floor by heavy doors with small observation windows. Few visitors ventured there, and those who did rarely stayed long. "Any changes?" Thalia asked, though she already knew the answer. Dr. Emery shook her head. "I adjusted his medication again, but the aggression response is consistent. County called this morning. They're giving us until Friday. Friday. 5 days to rehabilitate a dog that had attacked 3 handlers and rejected every attempt at socialization. 5 days to overturn a euthanasia order that had already been delayed twice on Thalia's insistence. He deserves more time," Thalia said quietly. "I know, but Officer Renault was clear. Unless something changes dramatically, his hands are tied." The front doors swung open, bringing in a gust of autumn air and diverting their attention. A young man in his early 20s strode in, wearing the bright blue volunteer shirt with a confidence that suggested he thought it made him more important than he was. "Morning, Thalia, Dr. Emery." Declan nodded at them both, his eagerness palpable. He'd been volunteering for just 3 weeks, yet already spoke with the authority of someone who considered themselves indispensable. "Adoption floors packed today. Good sign, right?" "Every little bit helps," Thalia acknowledged. "We're still at 97% capacity." "I finished the morning walks for A-Wing," Declan reported, pulling off his jacket. "Anything else you need help with?" Dr. Emery exchanged a glance with Thalia. "Actually, we could use assistance with medication administration in B-Wing if you're up for it." "Absolutely." Declan's face lit up at the prospect of more responsibility. "What about the isolation unit? Need any help there?" A brief silence fell between the 2 women. "Not today," Thalia decided. "B-Wing is plenty for now." Declan's expression flickered with disappointment and something else, curiosity. "Is this about the shepherd in 17? I heard some of the other volunteers talking about him." "What did you hear?" Dr. Emery asked carefully. "That he's dangerous, that he came from some kind of fighting situation." Declan leaned in slightly. "Someone said he nearly took off Renault's hand during the intake examination." "That's exaggerated," Thalia corrected firmly. "But yes, he has significant behavioral challenges. We're still assessing the best approach." "Why keep a dog like that?" Declan asked bluntly. "If he's that dangerous, I mean. Seems like a liability when we have so many friendly dogs that need homes." Thalia felt a familiar pressure building behind her temples. It was the same argument she'd heard from the county, from her board of directors, even from some of her most dedicated volunteers. On paper, it made perfect sense. Resources were limited, space was precious. Why devote either to an animal that might never be adoptable? "Every animal deserves a chance," she said simply. "Even the difficult ones." "But at what point?" Declan began. The shelter's front door opened again, cutting him off mid-sentence. The three of them turned automatically to greet the newcomer. And for a moment, no one spoke. The man who entered rolled forward in a wheelchair, his movements precise and controlled. He wore faded jeans and a navy blue hoodie with the hood down, revealing close-cropped dark hair peppered with gray at the temples. His face was weathered, neither young nor old, with a strong jawline partially covered by several days of stubble. But it was his eyes that captured Thalia's attention. Pale blue, alert, and assessing everything with an intensity that seemed to catalog and evaluate the entire room in seconds. Around the adoption floor, conversations quieted. Even the dogs seemed to sense something different, their barking subsiding to curious whines. The man appeared untroubled by the attention, continuing his steady progress into the shelter. Thalia moved forward automatically. "Good morning. Can I help you find a companion today?" The man's gaze shifted to her, revealing nothing. "Just looking." His voice was low and quiet, yet carried clearly. "Of course. Feel free to explore the adoption floor. All available animals have information cards on their kennels, and volunteers can answer any questions." She gestured toward the main kennel area. "Is there a particular type of dog you're interested in?" "I'll know when I see it." He nodded once, then navigated around her, moving toward the kennels. Thalia watched him go, noting the practiced efficiency of his movements. Despite the wheelchair, there was something distinctly military in his bearing. The ramrod straight posture, the economy of motion, the situational awareness. His hands caught her attention too, scarred across the knuckles, with calluses that spoke of physical work rather than disability. "Interesting guy," Declan murmured beside her. "Think he's a vet?" "Seems likely," Dr. Emery agreed quietly. "The posture gives it away." They observed as the man made his way through the adoption floor, passing kennel after kennel of eager, friendly dogs. At each, he paused briefly, made eye contact with the animal, then moved on without reaction. No smiles, no extended hands, no baby talk that most visitors couldn't resist. What struck Thalia most was how the dogs responded to him. Usually, potential adopters were greeted with excited barking and jumping. But as this man passed, the dogs grew oddly quiet, many sitting at attention or watching him with unusual focus. "That's weird," Declan noted. "It's like they're all, I don't know, respecting him or something." Dr. Emery nodded thoughtfully. "Animals recognize authority, or maybe something else entirely." The man continued his methodical inspection, working his way toward the back of the adoption floor. When he reached the heavy doors leading to the isolation wing, he paused, reading the staff-only sign posted there. Thalia moved quickly to intercept him. "I'm sorry, sir. That section isn't open to the public. It's for animals under medical observation or behavioral assessment." He turned to face her, his expression unchanged. "You have a German Shepherd back there." It wasn't a question, and Thalia felt a ripple of surprise. The isolation wing wasn't visible from the main floor, and they didn't advertise which animals were held there. "How did you know that?" she asked. "I can hear him. Different pitch than the others." He nodded toward the door. "Mind if I see him?" Thalia hesitated. Protocol was clear about keeping visitors away from the isolation cases, especially ones with aggression issues. But something about this man's calm certainty gave her pause. "That particular dog isn't up for adoption," she explained. "He has significant behavioral challenges and is under county assessment." "All the more reason to let me see him." Declan had approached and stood slightly behind Thalia, his posture protective. "Sir, that dog is dangerous. He's bitten staff members and can't be safely handled." The man's eyes flicked to Declan, then back to Thalia, dismissing. The younger man without comment. His focus remained entirely on the shelter director, waiting for her decision. Dr. Emery joined them, her professional curiosity evident. "May I ask if you have experience with difficult cases, behaviorally challenged dogs?" The man considered her for a moment. "Some." That single word, delivered without elaboration, somehow carried more weight than any detailed resume could have. Thalia made her decision. "You can observe from the corridor, but the dog stays in his kennel. I can't allow any direct interaction, for your safety." "Understood." Thalia swiped her key card, unlocking the isolation wing doors. The difference between sections was immediately apparent. The bright, open adoption floor gave way to a more clinical setting, concrete floors, metal kennels with solid lower panels rather than bars, and significantly fewer windows. The temperature was noticeably warmer, and the lighting dimmer to reduce stress on the animals housed there. The sounds changed too. Instead of the social barking and playful noises of the adoption floor, the isolation wing held a tense quiet, broken by occasional low growls or the rustling of animals adjusting in their bedding. "We currently have 4 dogs in isolation," Thalia explained as they walked. 2 for medical quarantine after coming in as strays, 1 recovering from surgery, and... A sudden slamming against metal interrupted her as they passed the kennel at the far end. A large German shepherd had lunged at the kennel door, his teeth bared in a warning snarl. His fur stood on end along his spine, and his dark eyes fixed on them with unmistakable aggression. "And kennel 17, Thalia finished quietly. The dog continued growling, a deep, threatening sound that seemed to fill the narrow corridor. His focus shifted between the 3 humans, tracking their movements with predatory intensity. "What's his name?" the man asked, stopping his wheelchair several feet from the kennel. "He doesn't have one yet," Dr. Emery replied. "He was listed as Shepherd Male 174 in the county seizure records. We've been calling him 17 for short, after his kennel number." The man studied the dog with the same careful attention he'd given the adoption floor animals, but for much longer. 17 responded by intensifying his display, growling louder, pacing the small space, and occasionally charging the kennel door. "Where was he found?" the man asked, never taking his eyes off the dog. "Abandoned property outside town," Thalia explained. "There was a county drug raid. He was chained in the yard, severely malnourished, had multiple wounds consistent with fighting or abuse. No collar, no microchip." "How long has he been here?" 3 weeks, Dr. Emery said. "We've been working with him daily, but his aggression responses haven't decreased with standard protocols. He allows us to feed him and clean his kennel, but only if we use the guillotine doors to separate him from staff. Any attempt at direct handling has resulted in aggression." Declan, who had been hanging back, couldn't resist commenting. "Sir, I wouldn't get too close. That one's problematic. Nobody can get near him without protective gear." The man didn't acknowledge Declan's warning. Instead, he wheeled himself closer to the kennel, stopping about 4 feet away. 17 responded immediately, lunging at the kennel door with enough force to make the metal rattle. "I think that's close enough," Thalia said, concern evident in her voice. "He's displaying all his warning signals." "That one's untouchable," Dr. Emery added quietly. "He's been through too much." For the first time since entering the shelter, the man's expression changed subtly. A ghost of something. Understanding, recognition, passed across his features. "So have I," he said, his voice barely audible. Without warning, he maneuvered his wheelchair closer and lowered it to bring himself to eye level with the dog. 17 snarled, showing an impressive row of teeth, but the man remained perfectly still. "Sir, please," Thalia began, stepping forward. The man held up one hand to stop her, never breaking eye contact with the dog. Thalia froze, caught between protocol and fascination. For nearly a minute, man and dog locked eyes in absolute silence. 17's growling gradually decreased in volume, but didn't stop entirely. The shepherd's posture remained alert, suspicious, ready to attack. But something had shifted in the standoff. The dog seemed confused by the man's lack of reaction to his threats. Then, slowly, deliberately, the man extended his hand toward the kennel bars, palm up. "Don't!" Declan hissed. Thalia tensed, ready to intervene, though she wasn't sure how she could prevent a bite through the bars. Dr. Emery remained completely still, her clinical interest overriding her concern. 17 growled louder, backing up slightly in his kennel, then inching forward again. His nostrils flared as he caught the man's scent. For several heartbeats, the dog seemed frozen in indecision. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, 17 took another step forward. The growling softened to a low rumble, then gradually faded, his head lowered slightly, nose twitching as he assessed the offered hand. And then, impossibly, the shepherd moved closer until his head was nearly touching the bars. He sniffed the man's hand thoroughly, his posture still rigid, but no longer openly aggressive. "Incredible," Dr. Emery whispered. After a final inspection, 17 did something none of them had seen him do with any human. He pressed his forehead against the bars, allowing the man's fingertips to make contact with his fur. The shelter staff stood in stunned silence. The dog that had rejected every human interaction, that had been deemed too dangerous to handle, was voluntarily initiating contact. "How did you do that?" Thalia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man gently withdrew his hand, and 17 remained at the front of the kennel instead of retreating to his defensive position in the back corner. "You don't command trust," the man said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. "You earn it." He studied the dog for a moment longer, then straightened in his wheelchair. "Thank you for letting me see him." Thalia struggled to find words. "Of course. I've never seen him respond like that to anyone." "Will you be putting him down?" The question was direct, emotionless. "The county has ordered it," Dr. Emery answered honestly. "We have until Friday to demonstrate significant behavioral improvement, or we'll have to comply." The man nodded once, absorbing this information. "I'll be back tomorrow." Without further explanation, he turned his wheelchair and headed back toward the exit. Thalia and Dr. Emery exchanged bewildered glances before following him, leaving Declan to secure the isolation wing. "Sir?" Thalia called as they reached the adoption floor. "I didn't catch your name." He paused, seeming to consider whether to answer. Brant Calloway. "I'm Thalia Winfield, the shelter director. This is our veterinarian, Dr. Farron Emery." "Nice to meet you," he said with simple courtesy. "What time do you open tomorrow?" 9 a.m., Thalia replied. "But if you're interested in 17, I should warn you that his case is complicated. The county has serious concerns about liability." "I understand risk," Brant said, his tone suggesting depths to that statement that Thalia couldn't begin to fathom. "See you tomorrow." They watched as he exited the shelter with the same quiet efficiency with which he'd entered, the door closing softly behind him. "What just happened?" Thalia asked, not really expecting an answer. Dr. Emery shook her head slowly. "In 15 years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen anything quite like that. That dog has rejected every human interaction attempt we've made for 3 weeks. Could it be something about his physical position? The wheelchair? Possibly, but I doubt it. Did you notice how the other dogs responded to him too? There's something else at work here." Declan rejoined them, his expression caught between awe and skepticism. "That was weird, right? I mean, that dog is like the most aggressive case we've had all year." Dr. Emery didn't respond directly. Instead, she asked, "Thalia, do you think he's coming back tomorrow?" "Yes," Thalia said with certainty. "I believe he is." The following morning found Thalia arriving at the shelter 30 minutes early. She told herself it was to catch up on paperwork, but in truth, she couldn't stop thinking about the strange interaction she'd witnessed the day before. She'd spent her evening researching animal behavior and bonding phenomena, finding nothing that adequately explained what she'd seen. She was checking 17's monitoring log when the shelter's front door opened precisely at 9. Brant Calloway rolled in, wearing the same navy hoodie but with different jeans. In daylight, she noticed more details: a military-precise haircut, faint scarring along his right jawline, and an overall physical fitness that suggested the wheelchair was a recent development rather than a lifelong condition. "Good morning," she greeted him, trying to sound professional rather than eager. "Morning," he nodded. "I'd like to see the shepherd again." Direct and to the point. No small talk, no preamble. "Of course. Dr. Emery will be in shortly. She'd like to observe as well, if you don't mind." "That's fine." As she led him to the isolation wing, Thalia found herself curious about this unusual man. "Have you had German shepherds before, Mr. Calloway?" "Brant is fine," he corrected mildly. "And yes, I've worked with them." "Professionally?" she probed. He considered her question before answering. "You could say that." His reluctance to elaborate was evident, but Thalia pressed gently. "It would help us understand how you connected with 17 yesterday. We've been trying every standard protocol without success." "Standard protocols assume standard dogs," Brant replied. "I don't think that's what you have here." They reached 17's kennel, finding the shepherd alert and at the front of his enclosure rather than huddled in the back corner as usual. When he saw Brant, his ears perked forward with what appeared to be recognition. "He remembered you," Thalia observed with surprise. "They always do," Brant said quietly. Then to the dog, "Morning, buddy." 17 didn't growl. His posture remained alert, but not aggressive, a dramatic departure from his typical response to humans. "May I have some time alone with him?" Brant asked. Thalia hesitated. "I can't leave you completely unsupervised with him. It's against our protocols, especially with dogs under behavioral assessment. I understand. How about you observe from there?" He indicated the corridor junction about 15 feet away. Close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give us some space. It was a reasonable compromise. "All right, 10 minutes. Thalia retreated to the suggested position, maintaining a clear view of both Brant and 17. Rather than immediately approaching the kennel, Brant positioned his wheelchair at an angle and simply sat quietly. The shepherd watched him intently, but made no aggressive displays. After several minutes of this silent communication, Brant spoke in a low, conversational tone that Thalia could barely hear. She couldn't make out the words, but their effect on the dog was remarkable. 17 cocked his head, listening with focused attention. Dr. Emery arrived, clipboard in hand, and joined Thalia at her observation post. "How's it going?" she whispered. "See for yourself," Thalia replied, nodding toward the kennel. They watched as Brant slowly extended his hand to the kennel bars again. This time, 17 approached without hesitation, sniffing the offered hand before pressing his nose against it. "Extraordinary," Dr. Emery murmured. "The difference in body language from yesterday is striking. Look at his ears, his tail position. He's still alert, but there's no fear response." The 10 minutes stretched to 15 as neither woman wanted to interrupt the remarkable session. Finally, Brant backed his wheelchair away from the kennel and rejoined them. "He's not aggressive," he stated simply. "He's hypervigilant. There's a difference." "Could you explain?" Dr. Emery asked, her professional interest piqued. "Aggression comes from many places: fear, territoriality, resource guarding. What he's showing is threat assessment. He's calculating risk, not reacting emotionally." Brant glanced back at the shepherd. "You said he was found at a drug location?" "Yes," Thalia confirmed. "County narcotics raid." Brant nodded as if this confirmed something. "I'd like to see him in an open space. Do you have an exercise yard?" The request was unorthodox, especially for a dog with 17's history. But after what they'd just witnessed, Thalia found herself willing to bend protocols. "We have a secure training yard, but I need to be clear. If you want to interact with him directly, we'd need waivers signed, and I'd insist on safety precautions." "Fair enough," Brant agreed. "Let's start there." 30 minutes later, after signing multiple liability forms and reviewing safety procedures, they stood in the shelter's fenced training yard. Thalia had called in 2 additional staff members to assist if needed, and everyone wore protective gear except Brant, who had declined it. "Are you sure about this?" Thalia asked one final time as she prepared to release 17 into the yard through the secure transfer gate. Brant had positioned himself near the center of the space, having transferred from his wheelchair to a sturdy bench. "Positive," he replied with a calm certainty that somehow reassured her despite her misgivings. Dr. Emery gave the signal, and the staff member operating the guillotine door raised it, creating an opening between 17's temporary holding area and the yard. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then the shepherd appeared in the doorway, his posture rigid and alert. He surveyed the yard methodically, noting each human present before focusing on Brant, seated in the center. "Nobody move," Brant instructed quietly. "No sudden sounds." 17 stepped fully into the yard, maintaining his distance from the humans along the fence. He circled the perimeter once, twice, checking for threats or escape routes. His movements were fluid and deliberate, nothing like the frantic pacing he exhibited in his kennel. After completing his assessment, he stopped, facing Brant directly. The two regarded each other across 20 feet of open space. Then Brant did something unexpected. He made a subtle gesture with his right hand, fingers extended, then curled inward twice in quick succession. 17's reaction was immediate and shocking. He froze, head tilted sharply, ears fully erect. Brant repeated the gesture, adding a soft clicking sound with his tongue. The shepherd took 3 steps forward, stopped, then continued more confidently until he stood about 6 feet from Brant. "What on earth?" Dr. Emery whispered. Brant made another hand signal, different this time, his palm facing down and moving horizontally. 17 immediately sat. his attention fully focused on the man. A collective gasp went up from the observing staff. No one had been able to get the dog to respond to even the most basic commands in 3 weeks of attempts. "Someone trained him," Brandt said, loud enough for them all to hear. "Military or police, before whatever happened to him." "How can you tell?" Thalia asked, approaching cautiously. "The response patterns. These aren't basic obedience signals. They're tactical commands." Brandt made another gesture, and 17 lay down. "He recognizes the system, if not the specific commands I'm using." Dr. Emery moved closer, her scientific curiosity overcoming caution. "Are you saying he's a professional working dog? But he had no identification, no microchip." "Doesn't mean he didn't start as one," Brandt replied. "Could have been washed out of a program, sold or stolen, hard to say." As they spoke, 17 remained in his down position, but his eyes never left Brandt. There was an unmistakable connection forming, a recognition that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Military working dog handler?" Dr. Emery asked suddenly. Brandt looked up, surprised by her insight. "How did you know?" "My brother served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army's 189th Military Police. I recognized the approach." She studied him with new understanding. "The way you position yourself, the commands, it's distinctive." For a moment, Brandt seemed unsure how to respond, as if unaccustomed to being recognized or discussed. "Long time ago," he finally acknowledged. Thalia felt pieces clicking into place, his military bearing, his understanding of the dog, his careful assessment of the environment. "Is that how you knew he'd respond to you?" "I didn't know," Brandt admitted. "But I suspected. His reactions in the kennel weren't random aggression. They were trained responses triggered by stress and confinement." Over the next hour, they watched as Brandt worked with 17, establishing boundaries and reintroducing basic command structures. The transformation was remarkable. While still alert and cautious around others, the shepherd showed none of the aggressive lunging or growling that had defined his shelter stay. "I'd like to come back tomorrow," Brandt said as the session concluded. "Work with him daily if possible." Thalia exchanged glances with Dr. Emery, who nodded encouragingly. "That would be tremendous," Thalia agreed. "What you've accomplished in 1 session is more than we managed in 3 weeks." "He just needed the right translator," Brandt said simply. As they returned 17 to his kennel, a process that went smoothly for the first time since his arrival, Thalia felt a spark of hope. Friday's deadline suddenly seems less impossible. "One day at a time," Brandt cautioned. "He's got a long way to go." True to his word, Brandt returned every morning that week. Each session built on the progress of the last, with 17 becoming increasingly responsive to commands and showing decreased reactivity to environmental triggers. By Thursday, the shepherd would allow Dr. Emery to approach while Brandt was present, though he remained wary of other staff members. "The county assessment is tomorrow," Thalia reminded Brandt. As they concluded their 5th session, "Officer Renault will want to see significant improvement." "He'll see it," Brandt said with quiet confidence. "But there's something else we need to discuss." They sat in Thalia's small office, the administrative heart of the shelter. Through the window, they could see the late afternoon light, casting long shadows across the exercise yard where they'd just been working. "I want to adopt him," Brandt stated. Though not entirely surprised, Thalia still felt a moment of hesitation. Even with his history, the county will require extensive liability, waivers, follow-up assessments, possibly specialized containment at your residence. "I understand the requirements. May I ask why?" The question had been building all week. Of all the dogs that need homes, why choose one with such significant challenges? Brandt considered her question carefully. "Because he deserves someone who understands him." After a pause, he added, "And maybe I do too." The simple honesty of his response touched something in Thalia. She nodded, pulling out the appropriate forms. "We'll need to process your application before the county review tomorrow. Standard background check, veterinary references if you've had pets before, home verification." Brandt completed the forms with military precision. Address: a cabin on 3 acres outside town. Employment: consultant with Veterans Affairs. Previous pets: none currently, but extensive professional experience with working dogs. When he reached the reference section, he hesitated briefly before writing a name, Commander Kestrel Adair, and a phone number with a military extension. Is this your commanding officer? Thalia asked, noting the title. Former, Brant corrected. But we stay in touch. Perfect. I'll call this afternoon to verify. Thalia filed the forms and walked him to the front entrance. See you tomorrow for the county assessment? 9 a.m., he confirmed, before wheeling himself out to the parking lot, where a modified dark blue pickup truck waited. That evening, after the shelter had closed to the public, Thalia sat at her desk with the adoption application and her phone. The day had been long, filled with the usual crises and small victories of shelter management, but her mind kept returning to the remarkable transformation she'd witnessed in 17, and her curiosity about the man responsible for it. She dialed the reference number on the application, expecting a brief verification conversation. After 2 rings, a crisp, authoritative female voice answered. Commander Adair speaking. Good evening, Commander. My name is Thalia Winfield from Lakeview Animal Shelter. I'm calling regarding Brant Calloway's adoption application. He listed you as a reference. There was a pause on the line. Calloway? You're calling about Calloway? The commander's tone held surprise and something else. Respect, perhaps. Yes, ma'am. It's our standard procedure to verify references before approving adoptions, especially for dogs with behavioral challenges. Another pause. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with, Ms. Winfield? The unexpected question sent a ripple of uncertainty through Thalia. I know he's a veteran who has a remarkable way with a troubled dog we've been trying to rehabilitate. Beyond that, he's been rather private about his background. That sounds like him, Commander Adair replied, a hint of wry amusement in her voice. Ms. Winfield, I'll be coming to your facility tomorrow morning. I'd like to observe this dog and Calloway together before providing my recommendation. Thalia blinked in surprise. That's not necessary, Commander. A phone reference is entirely sufficient. Nevertheless, I'll be there. The commander's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. What time is the county assessment scheduled? 9 a.m.? I'll arrive at 8:30. Before Thalia could respond, Commander Adair added, And Ms. Winfield, whatever Brant Calloway is offering to do for this animal, accept it. There are few people on this earth I would trust more. With that cryptic endorsement, the line went dead, leaving Thalia staring at her phone with more questions than answers about the quiet man who had appeared so suddenly in their shelter and changed everything. Thalia arrived at the shelter earlier than usual the following morning, her mind still processing Commander Adair's unexpected call. The autumn air held a crisp edge as she unlocked the front doors, flipped on the lights, and made her way to the isolation wing. 17 was already awake, pacing his kennel with the restless energy that had characterized his first weeks at the shelter. But when he spotted Thalia, he stopped and regarded her with what seemed like recognition rather than hostility. Big day today, she told him softly. Let's hope it goes well. At precisely 8:30, the shelter's front door opened. Thalia had been expecting Commander Adair, but the woman who entered exceeded all expectations. Tall and imposingly fit, the commander wore a formal Navy dress uniform adorned with an array of medals and insignia that even Thalia, with no military background, could tell represented significant achievement. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her posture radiated authority. She looked to be in her late 40s, with the weathered complexion of someone who had spent considerable time in the harsh environments. Ms. Winfield? The commander extended her hand. Her grip was firm and brief. Commander Kestrel Adair, thank you for accommodating my visit. Of course, Thalia replied, feeling oddly intimidated. We appreciate your interest in our adoption process. Commander Adair's expression remained neutral. Where is Calloway? He hasn't arrived yet. We're expecting him at 9, along with the county animal control officer. Thalia gestured toward her office. Would you like some coffee while we wait? Thank you. The commander followed her, eyes scanning the shelter environment with the same methodical assessment Thalia had observed in Brant. Tell me about this dog. Over coffee served in chipped shelter mugs, Thalia explained 17's history, the county seizure, his aggressive behavior, the failed rehabilitation attempts, and finally, the remarkable transformation they had witnessed over the past week. And Calloway wants to adopt him? Commander Adair asked, though it sounded less like a question and more like confirmation of something she already understood. Yes, he's been working with him daily. The change has been extraordinary. The Commander nodded thoughtfully. Before I approve this, I need to see them together. Of course. They should both be here soon. Thalia hesitated, then added, Commander, may I ask how you know Brant? He's been rather private about his background. Adair studied her for a moment. How much has he told you? Very little, that he worked with military dogs, that it was a long time ago. Dr. Emery, our veterinarian, recognized his handling techniques. A faint smile touched the commander's lips. Observant, your doctor. Yes, Calloway worked with military working dogs, among other things. She set her mug down with precision. Ms. Winfield, I appreciate your discretion, so I'll be direct. I'm here because when Brant Calloway takes an interest in something, it matters. His judgment is exceptional, especially regarding working dogs. Before Thalia could press for more details, the front door opened again. Dr. Emery arrived, followed closely by Brant in his wheelchair. Upon seeing Commander Adair, Brant froze momentarily, then continued forward, his expression carefully controlled. Commander, he acknowledged with a respectful nod. Didn't expect to see you here. Calloway. Adair stood, her posture somehow becoming even more formal. Ms. Winfield called for a reference check. I thought it warranted a personal appearance. Something passed between them, an unspoken communication born of shared history. Brant gave a slight nod. Appreciated. Dr. Emery, sensing the significance of the moment, introduced herself to the commander. As they exchanged pleasantries, Thalia noticed Brant scanning the shelter, his attention eventually settling on the isolation wing doors. How is he this morning? He asked Thalia quietly. Alert, responsive. I think he was looking for you. A hint of satisfaction crossed Brant's features. Good. Renault should be here soon. Any minute. He's bringing his supervisor too. Brant nodded, unsurprised. More eyes, more paperwork. Standard procedure. Commander Adair rejoined them. I'd like to see you work with the dog before the officials arrive. Without waiting for a response, she headed toward the isolation wing, clearly expecting them to follow. Dr. Emery exchanged a glance with Thalia, both intrigued by the commander's authoritative presence. When they reached 17's kennel, the shepherd was standing alert at the front, his attention immediately fixing on Brant. There was no growling, no aggressive display, just intense focus. Morning, buddy, Brant greeted him quietly. 17's tail gave a single, tentative wag. Commander Adair observed the interaction with clinical interest. How responsive is he to commands? Increasingly consistent, Brant replied. Basic positioning, some tactical signals. Still working on civilian transitions. The commander nodded as if this made perfect sense, though Thalia found herself struggling to follow their specialized shorthand. Show me, Adair directed. They moved to the training yard, following the same safety protocols they had established earlier in the week. Once 17 was released into the space, the difference in his behavior compared to that first session was remarkable. Instead of circling cautiously, he moved directly to Brant's side, alert but calm. For the next 15 minutes, Brant put the shepherd through a series of commands, some verbal, others just hand signals. 17 responded with increasing confidence, demonstrating a level of training that seemed to confirm Brant's theory about his professional background. Impressive progress, Commander Adair noted. His pattern recognition is excellent. He remembers, Brant said simply. Just needed the right cues. The commander stepped closer to the fence. May I enter? Thalia started to object, but Brant nodded. He's ready, but move slowly. With deliberate movements, Commander Adair entered the training yard. 17 immediately tensed, his attention shifting between her and Brant. Steady, Brant told the dog quietly. Commander Adair stopped several feet away, her posture relaxed but attentive. After a moment's assessment, she made a subtle hand gesture, different from Brant's signals, but clearly part of the same system. 17's reaction was immediate. His ears perked forward, and his body language shifted from cautious to attentive. Well, I'll be damned, the commander murmured. He is command-trained, Tier 2 at minimum. That was my assessment, Brant agreed. The response patterns are too specific. They continued exchanging specialized terminology that meant little to Thalia, but clearly confirmed something significant to both veterans. As they spoke, 17 gradually relaxed, dividing his attention between them as if recognizing they belonged to the same unit. their session was interrupted by the arrival of County Animal Control Officer Renault, a stout man in his 50s with a perpetually skeptical expression, accompanied by a woman in a formal county uniform, whom Thalia recognized as Supervisor Margolis. "Ms. Winfield?" Renault nodded brusquely. "I see you've already started the assessment." "Just warming up," Thalia explained, introducing Commander Adair and Brandt. Renault eyed the commander's uniform with surprise. "Military interest in this case?" "Personal interest," Commander Adair corrected smoothly. "I'm here as Mr. Calloway's reference for adoption." "I see." Renault didn't look entirely convinced. "Well, let's get started. The documentation indicates this animal has a history of aggressive behavior resulting in multiple bite incidents. We're here to determine if sufficient behavioral modification has occurred to warrant lifting the euthanasia order." Supervisor Margolis reviewed her tablet. "According to our records, this dog, designated Shepherd Male 174, has bitten 3 handlers, including yourself, Officer Renault." "That's correct," Renault confirmed, unconsciously flexing his right hand. "Required 14 stitches." "And you're aware of this history, Mr. Calloway?" Supervisor Margolis asked. "I am," Brandt replied calmly. "Yet, you've requested to adopt this animal?" Her tone suggested she questioned his judgment. "I have. May I ask why? There are many well-adjusted animals needing homes without this level of risk." Brandt considered his response carefully. "Because I understand what he needs, and I have the ability to provide it." Supervisor Margolis looked unimpressed by this answer. "Let's proceed with the formal assessment." Over the next hour, Brandt and 17 demonstrated their progress through a series of standardized tests designed to evaluate the dog's reactivity, obedience, and potential for safe integration into a home environment. Throughout, Commander Adair observed silently, her presence lending an unexpected gravity to the proceedings. "His response to basic commands is much improved," Renault acknowledged reluctantly, making notes on his clipboard. "But controlled environments aren't my concern. Real-world triggers are unpredictable." "Agreed," Brandt said, "which is why ongoing training is essential." Supervisor Margolis consulted her tablet again. "According to your adoption application, you live alone in a rural property outside town limits. What containment measures do you have in place?" "Fenced acre, secured dwelling, no nearby neighbors," Brandt replied. "I'm also home most days, which allows for consistent supervision." "And your physical limitations?" she asked, glancing pointedly at his wheelchair. The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Thalia felt a surge of indignation on Brandt's behalf, but before she could speak, Commander Adair stepped forward. "If I may," she interjected, her tone leaving little room for refusal. "I've known Mr. Calloway for 15 years. His capability to handle this or any animal is beyond question, regardless of his current mobility status." Something in her voice, perhaps the absolute certainty with which she spoke, gave the supervisor pause. "Thank you, Commander," she acknowledged. "However, our concern must be the safety of both the animal and the community. Mr. Calloway, in a situation where the dog becomes aggressive or attempts to flee, how would you respond?" Brandt met her gaze directly. "The same way I responded when 12 hostages needed extraction from a collapsed building while under enemy fire, with training, tools, and judgment." The statement landed with quiet force. Even Officer Renault looked up from his clipboard, reassessing the man before him. Supervisor Margolis cleared her throat. "Well, I think we have sufficient information for preliminary approval, pending a home inspection and final behavioral assessment. Officer Renault will schedule that at your convenience." As they completed the paperwork, Talia noticed Declan hovering near the administration desk, clearly curious about the gathering of officials. When there was a break in the conversation, he approached, wearing his volunteer shirt like armor. "Morning, Thalia, Dr. Emery." He nodded to each, then looked questioningly at the visitors. "Anything I can help with?" "We're just wrapping up 17's county assessment," Thalia explained. "Declan, this is Officer Renault and Supervisor Margolis from County Animal Control, Commander Adair. And you've met Brandt." Declan's eyes widened at the commander's uniform. "Wow, military brass for a dog adoption? Must be some special dog." The comment was innocent enough, but Thalia noticed both Brant and Commander Adair tense slightly. "Just here is a character reference," the commander said smoothly. Declan nodded, but his curiosity was evidently piqued. "Cool. Hey, I was looking up stuff about military working dogs online after Dr. Emery mentioned it. Those dogs are amazing, like the ones that helped get bin Laden and stuff. Is that the kind of thing you did, sir?" he asked, turning to Brant. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Brant's expression revealed nothing, but his knuckles whitened slightly on the arms of his wheelchair. "Declan," Thalia intervened, "could you help Dr. Emery prepare the morning medications? The assessment is still ongoing." "Sure, no problem." He backed away, apparently oblivious to the tension he'd created. "Nice meeting you all." After he left, Brant continued the conversation as if the interruption hadn't occurred, but Thalia noticed a new guardedness in his manner. Commander Adair, too, seemed to have shifted closer to him, almost protectively. Once the county officials departed with promises to schedule the home inspection within the week, Commander Adair turned to Brant. "Walk with me, Calloway," she said, then glanced at his wheelchair. "Figure of speech, you know what I mean?" They moved toward the shelter's small garden area, leaving Thalia and Dr. Emery at a discreet distance. Though Thalia couldn't hear their conversation, the body language was telling. The commander speaking intensely, Brant mainly listening. Occasional nods of agreement. At one point, Adair placed her hand on Brant's shoulder in what appeared to be a rare gesture of physical support. When they returned, the commander addressed Thalia directly. "Ms. Winfield, I want to thank you for your work with this animal. Your instinct to give him a chance was correct." "Thank you, Commander," Thalia replied, surprised by the acknowledgement. "I'm approving Brant's adoption reference without reservation," Adair continued. "But I'd like to make something clear. His record is classified. But I can tell you he's one of the most decorated operators in naval special warfare history. The fact that he's taking an interest in this animal is significant." The statement, delivered with such certainty, sent a ripple of questions through Thalia's mind. She looked at Brant, who maintained his usual stoic expression, revealing nothing. "I'll be in touch, Calloway," the commander said, extending her hand. They shook with the formality of longtime colleagues rather than close friends. "Don't be a stranger to the unit." "Yes, ma'am," Brant replied with ingrained respect. After Commander Adair departed, a contemplative silence fell over the shelter office. Dr. Emery was the first to break it. "Well, that was illuminating," she observed mildly. "Naval special warfare, that's SEAL territory, isn't it?" Brant didn't confirm or deny this, instead turning the conversation back to 17. "Assuming the county approves, what's the timeline for completing the adoption?" "Once the home inspection is done, we can finalize within 48 hours, Thalia explained, allowing him his privacy. "In the meantime, daily training sessions can continue." "Good, I'll be back tomorrow then." He nodded to them both and wheeled himself toward the exit. After he left, Dr. Emery turned to Thalia with raised eyebrows. "Special operator with a classified record? No wonder he connects with our problem dog." "It explains some things," Thalia agreed thoughtfully, "but raises even more questions." Over the next few days, Brant continued his daily sessions with 17. The shepherd's progress accelerated, with Dr. Emery documenting remarkable improvements in reactivity thresholds and command response. More surprising was the dog's gradual acceptance of other handlers. First Dr. Emery, then Thalia, though only when Brant was present. Curiosity about the unusual pair spread through the shelter staff. Declan, in particular, seemed fascinated by Brant's military background, frequently finding excuses to observe the training sessions. "I looked up Navy SEALs online," he told Thalia one afternoon, his voice lowered conspiratorially. "The training is insane. Bud-S, Hell Week, all that stuff. Only like 20% make it through. And then there are the special teams within the teams. Think that's what he did?" "Declan," Thalia admonished gently, "whatever Brant's background, he's entitled to his privacy. Our focus is on 17's rehabilitation." "Sure, absolutely," Declan agreed quickly. "It's just interesting, you know? A war hero at our little shelter." Thalia couldn't deny her own curiosity, but she respected Brant's reticence. There were hints, though, moments when his military past showed through the quiet exterior. The precise language he used in training logs, the way he positioned himself in rooms, always with sightlines to exits. the careful assessment he made of new people before engaging with them. On Thursday morning, Thalia arrived to find Officer Renault had scheduled Brant's home inspection for that afternoon. As she was updating the adoption file, Dr. Emery appeared at her office door, her expression troubled. "Everything okay?" Thalia asked. "Not sure," Dr. Emery admitted, stepping inside and closing the door. "I noticed something during this morning's session with Brant and 17. He seemed off, reaction time slower, hands trembling slightly. Could he be coming down with something?" "Maybe," Dr. Emery said, though she sounded unconvinced. When I asked if he was feeling all right, he took some medication from his pocket, said they were, quote, "souvenirs from my last deployment." Thalia frowned. "Did he elaborate?" "No," changed the subject immediately. Dr. Emery leaned against the desk. "Thalia, I think we're looking at PTSD, possibly pain management issues. My brother went through similar challenges after his service." The observation aligned with small details Thalia had noticed. Brant's occasional distant gaze, the nights he mentioned not sleeping well, the way certain sounds seemed to heighten his alertness. "Should we be concerned about the adoption?" Thalia asked, thinking aloud. "If he's managing health issues?" "Actually, I think it strengthens the case," Dr. Emery countered. "Watch how 17 responds when Brant's having a rough day. The dog instinctively moves closer, maintains physical contact. It's a support response, similar to trained service dogs." "You think they're helping each other?" Thalia realized. "I know they are." Dr. Emery smiled slightly. "Whatever Brant's dealing with, that dog recognizes it. They speak the same language." The home inspection that afternoon went smoothly. Officer Renault reported that Brant's cabin was military neat, with appropriate fencing and security measures already in place. The final adoption was scheduled for Monday morning, pending one last behavioral assessment with the county supervisor. Friday brought a complication Thalia hadn't anticipated. A local news crew arrived at the shelter, ostensibly to cover their upcoming adoption event, but with a particular interest in the miracle of 17's rehabilitation. "We heard you have a special case," the reporter explained, a young woman named Jenna with the polished enthusiasm of someone early in their career. "A dangerous dog being saved by a veteran? That's a great human interest story." "We have many successful rehabilitations," Thalia deflected, uncomfortable with the spotlight on Brant's private work. "Our upcoming event features dozens of animals looking for forever homes." "Of course, Anne will cover that," Jenna assured her. "But our producer specifically mentioned hearing about a German shepherd that was scheduled for euthanasia until a disabled veteran stepped in. Is that happening here?" Thalia silently cursed small-town gossip networks. "We have a rehabilitation in progress that matches that general description, but the adoption isn't finalized, and the individuals involved value their privacy." "Understood." Jenna nodded with professional sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll focus on the event, but if the veteran and dog are here today, we'd love to include a brief mention. No names necessary." The timing couldn't have been worse. Brant arrived for his regular session just as the news crew was setting up in the main adoption floor. Thalia hurried to intercept him, explaining the situation. "I've asked them to focus on the adoption event, not your work with 17, she assured him. "But I wanted you to know they're here." Brant's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "We can reschedule for tomorrow. If you prefer, they should be done in a couple of hours." He nodded, preparing to leave, when the reporter spotted them near the entrance. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by undisguised excitement. "Excuse me," she called, approaching quickly with her cameraman trailing behind. "Aren't you Lieutenant Commander Calloway, the SEAL from the Korengal rescue?" The question struck like a physical blow. Brant's posture changed instantly, spine straightening, jaw setting, eyes going flat and unreadable. The transformation was subtle but complete, military bearing replacing his civilian demeanor in seconds. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he said, his voice neutral but firm. The reporter persisted, her professional instincts clearly sensing a story. "I'm certain it's you, sir. I interned at KPBS in San Diego. They covered the ceremony when you received the—" "I'm not interested in interviews," Brant cut her off, already turning his wheelchair toward the exit. "Excuse me." He left without further comment, his departure so abrupt that even 17 noticed, whining from his kennel in the isolation wing. The reporter turned to Thalia, excitement barely contained. "Do you—" Know who that is? He led one of the most famous hostage rescues in recent military history. It was classified for years, but parts of it became public after the congressional hearings on special operations. Ms. Jenna, Thalia said firmly, whatever Mr. Calloway's background may be, he's here as a private citizen helping our shelter. I'd appreciate you respecting his privacy. The reporter looked disappointed, but nodded. Of course. But if he changes his mind about sharing his story, it would make an incredible feature. After the news crew finally departed, focusing their segment on the upcoming adoption event as promised, Thalia found herself drawn to the computer in her office. Hesitating only briefly, she typed, Lieutenant Commander Calloway Corringale Rescue, into the search engine. The results were sparse but significant. News articles from 3 years ago referenced a high-risk extraction operation led by Lieutenant Commander B. Calloway of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, a unit she quickly learned was the official designation for SEAL Team 6. Most details remained classified, but congressional testimony acknowledged that 12 American hostages had been rescued from a militant compound in Afghanistan's Korangal Valley. One article included a photograph from a military ceremony, partially obscured by someone's thumb, likely taken surreptitiously on a phone. Despite the poor quality, she recognized Brandt immediately. He stood straight and tall in his dress uniform, medals across his chest, receiving something from a high-ranking officer. The caption read, Lieutenant Commander Calloway, identity obscured for security, receives commendation for heroic actions that rescued 12 hostages from certain execution. Thalia sat back, processing this new information. The quiet, reserved man, who had connected so profoundly with their troubled shepherd, was actually a highly decorated special operations commander who had saved multiple lives under circumstances she could hardly imagine. Yet he had chosen to reveal none of this, instead focusing entirely on helping an animal that everyone else had given up on. Brandt didn't return the following day, which worried Thalia. Had the reporter's recognition driven him away? She considered calling him, but decided to respect his space. Instead, she visited 17 several times throughout the day, noticing how the shepherd watched the door expectantly whenever it opened. He'll be back, she assured the dog, hoping she was right. Monday morning arrived with a sense of nervous anticipation. The final county assessment was scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 9:30, Brandt still hadn't appeared. Thalia was considering calling him when the shelter doors opened, and he wheeled himself in, expression calm but determined. Sorry for disappearing Saturday, he said without preamble. Needed some time. No need to apologize, Thalia assured him, relief evident in her voice. Is everything okay? Fine, he replied, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Supervisor Margolis is coming? Yes, should be here any minute. Thalia hesitated, then added, 17 missed you. A ghost of a smile touched Brandt's lips. Feeling was mutual. They headed to the isolation wing, where 17 greeted Brandt with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, his tail wagging and body wiggling with excitement. The transformation from the aggressive, untouchable dog of 3 weeks ago was nothing short of remarkable. Someone's happy to see you, Dr. Emery observed, joining them with her clipboard. His stress indicators are the lowest we've recorded. Brandt nodded, visibly pleased. He's figuring out he's safe. Supervisor Margolis arrived precisely at 10, accompanied by Officer Renault. After reviewing Dr. Emery's documentation and observing a brief demonstration in the training yard, she seemed satisfied. Impressive improvement, she acknowledged. I'm prepared to lift the euthanasia order and approve the adoption with standard follow-up protocols. Excellent, Thalia said, unable to contain her smile. We can finalize the paperwork right away. The supervisor nodded, then added, one last assessment if you don't mind. Since the dog will be in the community, I'd like to see how he responds to handling by someone other than Mr. Calloway. Brandt tensed slightly but nodded his agreement. Who did you have in mind? Ms. Winfield seems to have established some rapport with the animal, Supervisor Margolis noted. Perhaps she could demonstrate basic handling. Thalia agreed, though with some trepidation. While 17 had allowed her to approach and even touch him in recent sessions, it had always been with Brandt immediately present. They returned to the training yard, and Brandt transferred to the bench as usual. After working through several commands with 17, he handed the leash to Thalia, remaining close by. Just basic positions, he advised quietly. Keep it simple. Thalia nodded, taking the leash with confident hands. 17 looked between her and Brant, clearly confused by the change, but remained calm. "Good boy," she encouraged, leading him in a small circle. "Sit." The shepherd complied, his attention divided between her and Brant. So far, so good. "Now let's test his response without Mr. Calloway's immediate presence," Supervisor Margolis suggested, "just to verify the behavioral changes are consistent." Brant frowned slightly. "He's still transitioning to multiple handlers. I wouldn't recommend—" "It will just be a brief demonstration," the supervisor insisted. "If he's truly rehabilitated, he should maintain basic obedience regardless of who's handling him." Before Brant could object further, a distant siren wailed from the direction of town, likely an ambulance or fire truck on a call. The sudden noise caused 17 to stiffen, his ears swiveling toward the sound. Thalia felt the immediate change in his body language. The relaxed demeanor vanishing, replaced with hypervigilant tension. "Easy," she murmured, trying to maintain her calm. "It's okay." The shepherd's attention was completely diverted now, his focus locked on the continuing siren, his muscles bunched beneath his fur, and his breathing quickened. Brant noticed immediately, moving to intervene. "Let me take him," he said, reaching for the leash. Supervisor Margolis stepped between them. "If you're not present, what happens? That's what we need to know. Can someone else control him in a trigger situation?" The siren grew louder, suggesting the emergency vehicle was approaching the shelter's vicinity. 17 began to pace, pulling against the leash, his previous training seemingly forgotten as instinct took over. "He's going into protection mode," Brant warned, his voice taking on an edge of urgency. "This isn't about obedience anymore." Thalia struggled to maintain control as the shepherd began circling rapidly, his attention darting between the siren and the humans surrounding him. His hackles rose and a low growl emerged from his throat, the first aggressive vocalization they had heard in days. "Control your animal, Ms. Winfield," Supervisor Margolis directed, her clipboard raised slightly as if for protection. Officer Renault reached toward his belt, where Thalia knew he carried animal control tools, including a taser. "This is exactly what we were concerned about," he said grimly. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. 17's growl deepened, his focus now shifting to Officer Renault's movement toward his belt. The trigger stacking was textbook, one stressor compounding upon another until the dog's rational training gave way to pure survival instinct. Just as Thalia felt the leash about to slip from her grasp, Brant's voice cut through the chaos with unexpected force. "Everyone stand down!" The command rang with such authority that everyone froze, even 17, whose head whipped toward Brant, ears fully erect. In the sudden stillness, Brant executed a series of precise hand signals, accompanied by verbal commands in what sounded to Thalia like a foreign language. Guttural consonants and sharp vowels that bore no resemblance to standard training cues. The effect on 17 was immediate and astonishing. His posture transformed, aggression giving way to disciplined attention. He immediately moved away from Officer Renault, returning to Brant's side and sitting at perfect attention, as if he were a different dog entirely. The shelter yard fell silent except for the fading siren in the distance. Supervisor Margolis and Officer Renault stared at Brant with undisguised surprise. Dr. Emery's clipboard hung forgotten at her side. Into this stunned silence stepped a figure none of them had noticed arrive, Commander Adair, in civilian clothes this time, but with the same military bearing. "Perhaps now is the time for transparency, Commander Calloway," she said, approaching the group with measured steps. Brant met her gaze, a silent communication passing between them before he nodded once, acceptance rather than agreement. "What everyone just witnessed," Commander Adair continued, addressing the group, "was a Tier 1 military working dog response. Not basic obedience, not pet training, specialized tactical commands designed for high-stress combat environments." Supervisor Margolis and Officer Renault exchanged bewildered glances as Commander Adair's words settled over the training yard. 17 remained perfectly positioned at Brant's side, all traces of his previous agitation gone, replaced by the disciplined stillness of a working dog awaiting further instruction. "Tier 1 military working dog response," Supervisor Margolis repeated, her clipboard now lowered. "I don't understand." Brant's gaze moved from the commander to 17, then back to the county officials. His expression remained calm, but Thalia could see resignation in the set of his shoulders, as if a burden carried privately was now being placed in public view. Maverick isn't just any shepherd, Brant said quietly, using the name he'd given the dog during their training sessions. The scars, the behavior patterns, the command responses, he's K9 Special Operations. Special Operations? Officer Renault echoed incredulously. You're saying this is a military dog? Was, Brant corrected, or at least started out that way. The response patterns are unmistakable. Dr. Emery moved closer, clinical interest overriding her surprise. The foreign language commands? What was that? Pashto, Commander Adair answered. Standard for working dogs deployed to Afghanistan, helps distinguish tactical commands from civilian environments. Thalia watched as understanding dawned on Dr. Emery's face. That's why he responded to you from the beginning, she said to Brant. He's not reacting to you personally. He's recognizing the command structure. Brant nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. He's not responding to me because I'm special. He's responding because we speak the same language. The revelation hung in the air, recontextualizing everything they'd witnessed over the past weeks. What had seemed like a miraculous connection between man and dog now appeared as something equally profound but entirely different. Two trained warriors recognizing each other's protocols. I still don't understand, Supervisor Margolis pressed. How would a military working dog end up at a drug house in our county? And if he is military trained, doesn't that make him more dangerous, not less? Commander Adair stepped forward, her authority evident even in civilian clothes. With your permission, I can provide some context that might help. At Supervisor Margolis's nod, the commander continued. Military working dogs are highly valued assets. They undergo rigorous selection and training, worth tens of thousands of dollars each. But the system isn't perfect. Dogs wash out of programs, retire from service, or sometimes... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes they're lost in action and not recovered. Like soldiers, Thalia said softly. Exactly like soldiers, Commander Adair confirmed. What happens after can vary. Some find their way to civilian handlers, others to law enforcement, and some, unfortunately, end up in private hands. Security contractors, personal protection, or worse. You think that's what happened here? Officer Renault asked. Someone acquired a military dog and used him for protection at a drug operation? It's a reasonable hypothesis, Brant replied. Would explain the aggressive protection responses, the tactical training alongside the distrust of humans. He was probably used as a security measure, kept isolated, possibly mistreated. Thalia felt a surge of sympathy as the shepherd's history came into sharper focus. No wonder he'd responded so defensively to confinement and strangers. He'd been trained for one purpose, then exploited for another, with who knew what abuses in between. If what you're saying is accurate, Supervisor Margolis said slowly, then this animal has specialized training that far exceeds standard pet ownership requirements. That raises serious liability questions for county approval. Brant met her gaze steadily. Which is precisely why he needs someone who understands both his training and his trauma. Commander Adair cleared her throat. Perhaps this would be an appropriate moment for full disclosure, Brant. A weighted silence fell between them. After a moment's consideration, Brant nodded and turned to address the group directly. Before my injury, I led SEAL Team Deployment Unit specializing in K9 integrated operations, he said, each word measured and precise. 15 years active duty, 8 specifically with military working dogs. I've trained, deployed with, and rehabilitated specialized tactical canines in combat zones across 3 continents. Officer Renault's skepticism visibly wavered. You're saying you're not just a veteran, you're a dog handler? Among other things, Commander Adair interjected with quiet significance. Brant continued, his focus unwavering. What you're seeing in Maverick isn't random aggression. It's specialized training overlaid with trauma responses. The rehabilitation he needs isn't just about basic obedience. It's about recontextualizing his training for civilian life. As if to emphasize this point, 17, now Maverick, remained perfectly positioned beside Brant's wheelchair, his attention divided between his handler and the potential threats surrounding them, exactly as he would have been trained to do. Supervisor Margolis studied them both, her expression softening slightly. This certainly changes the assessment parameters. We don't typically evaluate military-grade animals or specialized handlers. No reason you would, Brandt acknowledged. But it's why standard protocols weren't working. He needed someone who recognized what he was. The conversation might have continued along technical lines, but it was interrupted by an unexpected voice from beyond the training yard fence. "Commander Calloway, may I ask a few questions?" All heads turned to find Jenna, the reporter from Friday, standing with her cameraman at the edge of the yard. The news crew had apparently returned to capture B-roll footage of the shelter and stumbled upon something far more significant. "How long have you been recording?" Thalia asked, alarmed by the intrusion. "Just arrived," Jenna assured her, though the cameraman's focused attention suggested otherwise. "But we couldn't help overhearing. Is it true this dog has a military background similar to yours, Commander?" Brandt's expression closed immediately, the openness of moments before replaced by guarded neutrality. Recognizing his discomfort, Commander Adair moved to intercept the reporter. "This is a private county assessment," she stated firmly, "not a media opportunity." But Jenna persisted, her journalistic instincts clearly sensing a compelling story. The public would be fascinated to learn how a decorated SEAL is helping rehabilitate what might be a former military working dog. It's an incredible human interest piece. Before either Brandt or Commander Adair could respond, Supervisor Margolis unexpectedly intervened. "Ms. Winfield, is there somewhere we could continue this assessment privately?" Grateful for the supervisor's understanding, Thalia led the group back inside to the shelter's small conference room, leaving the disappointed news crew outside. Once seated around the table, with Maverick settled at Brandt's feet, the conversation resumed with newfound seriousness. "Commander Calloway," Supervisor Margolis began, the change in address notable, "your background obviously brings specialized expertise to this situation. However, it also raises questions I'm obligated to consider." "Understood," Brandt replied evenly. "You mentioned recontextualizing his training for civilian life. What exactly does that entail?" Brandt considered the question carefully. "Military dogs are trained for hypervigilance, threat detection, and immediate response. In combat zones, those are survival skills. In civilian life, they're liabilities. The rehabilitation process involves maintaining the training foundation while redirecting the response triggers." "And you've done this before?" Officer Renault asked, his tone more curious than challenging now. "Multiple times," Commander Adair answered before Brandt could speak. "Perhaps this would be an appropriate moment for me to provide additional context." With a subtle nod from Brandt, she continued, "What I'm about to share includes details that, while no longer classified, aren't widely known outside military circles." The room fell silent, even Maverick seeming to sense the importance of the moment. Brandt led our elite SEAL team unit specializing in high-risk extraction operations. Commander Adair explained, her voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering an official report. "These missions often utilize military working dogs for advanced reconnaissance, threat detection, and civilian protection." She paused, glancing at Brandt, who remained expressionless. 3 years ago, his team was tasked with extracting American hostages from a militant compound in the Korangal Valley of Afghanistan. Intelligence indicated 12 civilians were being held, with execution imminent. The stark reality of what such a mission would entail hung heavy in the room. Thalia found herself looking at Brandt with new understanding, seeing beyond the quiet man who had connected with a troubled dog to the commander who had led soldiers into unimaginable danger. "The operation was successful," Commander Adair continued. "All hostages were located. However, during extraction, the compound structure became unstable due to prior damage and recent weather conditions. As the team began evacuation, sections of the building collapsed, trapping hostages and team members in separate areas." Her voice softened slightly. Brandt returned to the unstable structure repeatedly, coordinating extraction routes and personally removing trapped individuals. All 12 hostages and every team member were successfully evacuated. "Except one," Brandt said quietly, breaking his silence. Commander Adair nodded, acknowledging his correction. Brandt made a final return to the structure for his K9 partner, who had been separated during the building collapse. The structure completely failed during this attempt. Brandt sustained catastrophic injuries that ended his field career. His dog was not recovered. The revelation settled over the room like a physical weight. Thalia found herself looking at Maverick with new understanding, not just a troubled animal in need, but a living embodiment of what Brant had lost. "I couldn't save my dog," Brant said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. He was still inside. Thalia felt the pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. "And you think Maverick?" "No, not the same dog," Brant shook his head, reaching down to rest his hand on Maverick's head. "But the same soul, the same purpose, corrupted by circumstance and misuse." Officer Renault cleared his throat, clearly affected by the story, despite his professional demeanor. "This context is significant, obviously far beyond our standard assessment protocols." "Indeed," Supervisor Margolis agreed, her earlier skepticism entirely gone. "I believe we have sufficient information to make a determination." She closed her tablet decisively. "The county withdraws all objections to this adoption. Commander Calloway is clearly the most qualified handler possible for an animal with this background. We'll process the final approval immediately." The decision brought visible relief to everyone in the room, except perhaps for Brant himself, who accepted the news with the same quiet reserve with which he'd faced the earlier scrutiny. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Officer Renault unexpectedly approached Brant, extending his hand. "Commander, I owe you an apology for my initial assessment. I failed to recognize what I was seeing." Brant accepted the handshake with a nod. "No apology needed. You were doing your job." Renault hesitated, then added, "My brother served in Afghanistan, 5th Mountain Division, had a dog like this one." His voice grew quiet. "Never told you he didn't come home." The simple admission carried with it an unexpected emotional weight. Brant held the officer's gaze for a moment, then offered a formal nod, a soldier's acknowledgement of shared understanding. As the county officials departed to complete the paperwork, the shelter's front door opened again and the news crew returned, this time with reinforcements. A full van emblazoned with the local station's logo had arrived, suggesting their initial interest had escalated. "Commander Calloway," Jenna called, approaching with renewed determination. "Our producer is very interested in your story. Would you consider a brief interview about your work with this special dog?" Brant tensed visibly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. But before he could decline, Commander Adair stepped forward. "The commander isn't available for personal interviews," she stated firmly. Then, with surprising flexibility, added, "However, he might be willing to provide comment on the value of military working dogs and their transition to civilian life, as a subject matter expert, not as a feature subject." Brant shot her a questioning glance, to which she responded with an almost imperceptible nod. After a moment's consideration, he turned to the reporter. 5 minutes, he conceded. About the dogs, not me. What followed was a masterclass in redirected interview techniques. Whenever Jenna attempted to steer the conversation toward Brant's personal story or military record, he smoothly pivoted back to the broader topic of working dogs, their training, and their needs after service. "They're soldiers," he stated simply, Maverick sitting perfectly at attention beside his wheelchair. "They deserve the same respect and care we give any veteran." As cameras rolled, Brant demonstrated Maverick's training, including several impressive tactical commands that showcased both the dog's intelligence and the bond forming between them. The demonstration culminated with Maverick performing a complex search pattern through the yard, then returning to Brant's side with perfect precision. The footage would later air as a 3-minute segment on the evening news, focusing on second chances for service dogs, rather than Brant's personal history. It would generate significant local interest in veteran support programs and ultimately lead to something neither Brant nor Thalia could have anticipated. But that was still to come. 3 months passed, bringing with them the first hints of spring to Lakeview. The shelter's main adoption room had been transformed with banners and decorations for their special Vets for Pets adoption event, an initiative born from Maverick's story that paired veterans with animals needing specialized care. Thalia surveyed the busy room with satisfaction. Nearly 30 people had arrived for the event, including several veterans specifically interested in dogs with behavioral challenges. The local news crew was back, this time by invitation, documenting the program's successful launch. "Quite a turnout," Dr. Emery observed, joining Thalia near the refreshment table. And look who just arrived. Brant entered through the main doors, though not in his wheelchair. Instead, he walked slowly with the assistance of forearm crutches, Maverick moving attentively at his side. The German Shepherd now wore a professional service dog vest, his transformation from aggressive shelter case to working partner complete. Brant! Thalia greeted them both warmly. And Maverick, looking very official today. Special occasion, Brant replied with a small smile, more relaxed than Thalia had ever seen him. The past months had brought subtle but significant changes, his face less guarded, his posture less rigid, his interactions more open. Dr. Emery bent to greet Maverick, who accepted her attention with dignified patience. The model student returns to inspire the next generation. That's the idea, Brant agreed, scanning the room with professional assessment. Good turnout. Better than we expected, Thalia confirmed. Your demonstration is scheduled for 11, if that still works. We'll be ready. As Brant moved through the room, Thalia noticed how people responded to him, with respect rather than pity, interest rather than awkwardness. The local news segment had generated unexpected support for the program, with donations allowing the shelter to develop specialized training for dogs with behavioral challenges. More surprising was how the story had resonated with the veteran community. What had begun as one man helping one dog had expanded into a structured program, pairing difficult-to-adopt animals with former service members looking for purpose and connection. At 11 o'clock, the room gathered for Brant's demonstration. With Maverick at his side, he explained the principles of working with high-energy, reactive dogs, the importance of consistency, the value of structured commands, and the mutual benefits of the human-canine bond. Animals with difficult backgrounds often understand trauma in ways others can't, he explained to the attentive audience. The dogs everyone has given up on are often the ones who understand us best. As he demonstrated Maverick's service dog capabilities, pressure therapy for anxiety, mobility support, perimeter, checking for hypervigilance management, Thalia noticed a young man watching with particular intensity from the back of the room. It took her a moment to recognize Declan, the former shelter volunteer, now sporting a military short haircut and standing with newfound confidence. When the demonstration concluded and the crowd dispersed to meet available animals, Declan approached Brant somewhat hesitantly. Commander Calloway, I don't know if you remember me. Declan from the shelter? I remember, Brant confirmed, his expression neutral but not unwelcoming. I wanted to thank you, sir. Declan shifted slightly, clearly nervous but determined. Watching you work with Maverick, seeing what you built here, it changed my direction. I enlisted, shipping to basic training next week. Surprise registered briefly on Brant's face. That's a significant decision. It is, Declan agreed, but the right one. You showed me what service really means. He extended his hand formally. I just wanted to say thank you before I left. Brant accepted the handshake, something like understanding passing between them. Do your best, listen more than you talk. The rest will follow. As Declan moved away to speak with Commander Adair, who had arrived in uniform for the event, Thalia joined Brant near the observation window overlooking the training yard. Another life you've influenced? She observed quietly. Brant shook his head. He made his own choice. After you showed him it was possible, Thalia smiled. Seems to be a pattern with you. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the activity in the adoption room. Several veterans were already completing paperwork for dogs they'd connected with, while others consulted with Dr. Emery about specific behavioral challenges. Maverick's not the only one who's changed, Thalia noted, glancing pointedly at Brant's crutches. He followed her gaze, a hint of self-consciousness crossing his features. Physical therapy's going well. Some days are better than others. He knows which is which. As if confirming this assessment, Maverick pressed slightly against Brant's leg, providing subtle support as they stood. Dr. Keller at the VA says I'm ahead of schedule, Brant continued, surprising Thalia with the voluntary information. In the early days, he'd never discussed his medical status. Asked me to speak to their PTSD group next month, about the program. That's wonderful, Thalia said sincerely, recognizing the significance of this step. Will you do it? Thinking about it, he admitted, might help some of them find what they need. Like you did? Brant looked down at Maverick, who gazed back with absolute focus. Something like that. As the event continued around them, Thalia found herself reflecting on that first day. Brant rolling down the shelter hallway, stopping at the kennel everyone avoided, the staff's warning. That one's untouchable. He's been through too much. Now, children approached. Maverick under Brant's careful guidance, the once aggressive dog accepting their tentative pats with dignified patience. The transformation seemed almost miraculous, yet it had come through consistent work, mutual understanding, and the recognition of shared experience. "Remember when we thought we were saving the dog?" Dr. Emery asked, joining them at the window. Thalia smiled, watching Brant demonstrate a command to an interested veteran. "Turns out, we were just the introduction." They saved each other. That evening, long after the adoption event had concluded and the shelter had closed, Brant sat on the porch of his cabin, Maverick lying contentedly at his feet. The events of the day had been exhausting but fulfilling, with 5 dogs finding homes with veterans who understood their special needs. The night was clear, stars spreading across the sky above the tree line surrounding his property. In the stillness, memories sometimes found their way to the surface. The collapse of the building in Korengal, the weight of responsibility, the faces of those he'd managed to save and the one he hadn't. On bad nights, these memories became nightmares that left him gasping and disoriented. Tonight was one of those nights. He woke suddenly, sheets tangled around him, heart racing, the sound of falling rubble still echoing in his ears. For a disorienting moment, he was back there, dust filling his lungs, the radio crackling with desperate calls, the knowledge that time was running out. Then, a solid weight pressed against his side. Maverick had already moved into position, providing the deep pressure therapy they'd practiced for exactly these moments. The dog's steady presence anchored Brant to reality, his warm weight a constant reminder. Here, now, safe. "Standing watch, huh?" Brant murmured, his breathing gradually slowing as he scratched behind the shepherd's ears. Through the bedroom window, he could see both their reflections, man and dog, silhouetted against the silver-blue moonlight. 2 warriors from different worlds, carrying similar scars, finding in each other what neither could find alone. "The hardest part of coming home," Brant said softly to the darkness, "is feeling like you don't belong anymore, like no one understands what you carry." With Maverick's support, he stood carefully, the pain in his legs sharp but manageable. Leaving the crutches by the bed, he took several deliberate steps toward the window, one hand resting on the shepherd's solid back for balance. Outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the mountains, pale light creeping across the valley toward his cabin. A new day, another step forward. "But sometimes," Brant whispered, "understanding comes without words." The weeks and months that followed brought steady progress for both man and dog. They established routines that supported their healing. Early morning hikes along trails Brant had adapted for accessibility, training sessions that kept Maverick's mind engaged, and regular visits to the shelter to work with new program participants. Brant eventually accepted Dr. Keller's invitation to speak at the VA, Maverick accompanying him as living proof of what was possible. His presentation, brief, direct, and devoid of self-promotion, resonated deeply with the veterans struggling to find their place in civilian life. Several enrolled in the shelter program afterward, discovering in abandoned animals the connection and purpose they'd been missing. The local shelter program expanded to neighboring counties, then gained national attention when a veterans magazine featured Brant and Maverick in a short article about innovative PTSD therapies. Brant declined all follow-up interview requests, preferring to work quietly with the veterans and dogs who needed help. But the momentum continued without his promotion. On a perfect autumn day, almost exactly 1 year after their first meeting, Brant took Maverick to an open field behind his cabin. The wheelchair sat empty at the edge of the clearing, a tangible marker of how far they'd come. Though Brant still used it on difficult days, these grew increasingly rare as his strength returned. He unclipped Maverick's leash, watching as the shepherd bounded across the field with uninhibited joy. Gone was the aggressive, fearful animal from the isolation kennel. In his place ran a confident, balanced working dog who had found his purpose again, not in combat or protection, but in healing and connection. Brant reached into his pocket and withdrew a tennis ball. "Maverick, ready?" The shepherd turned immediately, his attention locking onto Brant with perfect focus. When the ball sailed across the field, Maverick launched after it with athletic precision, returning it proudly to Brant's hand. A simple game, played countless times by countless dogs and humans throughout history. Yet, in this moment, between these two specific souls, it represented something profound. Trust rebuilt, purpose rediscovered, futures reclaimed from the wreckage of the past. In the distance, at the edge of the property, Thalia watched from her car, reluctant to interrupt the moment. She had come to deliver paperwork for the program's newest participants, but seeing them together, man and dog in perfect harmony, she decided it could wait. Some partnerships transcended explanation, some healing defied clinical terminology, and some heroes walked on 4 legs, while others rebuilt their lives one day at a time. As she quietly backed out of the driveway, Thalia smiled at the simple truth they had all discovered. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves a chance. And sometimes, those who have lost the most are the ones who understand best how to find their way back home. Have you ever watched a soul heal another without saying a word? Share your story in the comments below. Whether it was an animal that saved you, or someone you know, or a silent act of understanding that changed everything. Every story of connection matters. Subscribe to witness more moments where courage meets compassion and lives are transformed in the quiet spaces between hearts.